My son-in-law locked me in the buffet kitchen. Stay here until the end. Your clothes are a disgrace. Desperate, I called my former housekeeper's son, a boy I treated like my own, now the CEO of the company where my son-in-law works. Nobody knew I was still in touch with him. When he entered the hall with 10 bodyguards, no one could have predicted what happened next. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Patty, and I'm 65 years old. I never thought that at this stage of my life, I would be locked in a kitchen like a prisoner, tears streaming down my face while listening to laughter from the other side of the door. But here I was, trapped in the buffet kitchen at my son-in-law's company party, all because Grant decided my clothes were an embarrassment to the family. It started as what should have been a pleasant evening. My daughter Sarah had invited me to accompany them to Grant's company annual celebration. "Mom, it's important for Grant's career," she had said over the phone 3 days earlier. "All the executives will be there with their families. It would mean a lot if you came." I had been excited. It had been months since Sarah and I spent quality time together, and I thought this might be an opportunity to bridge the growing distance between us. I spent 2 days choosing my outfit. A navy blue dress I had bought at Walmart for $39, paired with my best black shoes that I had polished until they gleamed. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to think my best would be good enough for Grant's world. The venue was elegant, far more luxurious than anywhere I had ever been. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and waiters in crisp white uniforms carried silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I felt out of place the moment we walked in, but I tried to hold my head high. After all, I was there as Sarah's mother, and that should have been enough. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. Grant introduced me to a few colleagues as Sarah's mother, though I noticed he never mentioned my name. Sarah stayed close to me initially, pointing out different executives and their wives. I tried to make small talk, but I could sense the polite smiles and quick glances at my outfit. These women wore designer dresses that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check of $857. The turning point came when Grant's boss, Mr. Richardson, approached our group with his wife. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing what I assumed was a very expensive black cocktail dress with jewelry that caught the light beautifully. Grant immediately straightened up, his entire demeanor changing to what I can only describe as desperate eagerness to impress. "Mr. Richardson, what an honor," Grant said, practically bowing. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Sarah." Sarah smiled graciously and shook hands with both Mr. and Mrs. Richardson. Then Grant's eyes fell on me, and I saw something shift in his expression. It was a look I had become familiar with over the 5 years he had been married to Sarah, a mixture of embarrassment and barely contained irritation. "And this is—" Grant paused, his voice trailing off as if he couldn't quite figure out how to explain my presence. "I'm Patty, Sarah's mother," I said, extending my hand with a warm smile. "It's lovely to meet you both." Mrs. Richardson shook my hand politely, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with her husband. It was subtle, but after 65 years of life, you learn to read these things. I saw the way her eyes took in my dress, my shoes, my simple jewelry, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, focusing mainly on Grant's recent projects and Sarah's work at the marketing firm. I tried to contribute once, mentioning how proud I was of Sarah's achievements, but Grant quickly steered the conversation away from me. When the Richardsons excused themselves to mingle with other guests, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. "Jesus Christ, Mom," Grant hissed in my ear the moment the Richardsons were out of earshot. His grip on my elbow was firm, almost painful. "What the hell were you thinking?" I looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Your clothes, your whole appearance. Do you have any idea how important tonight is for my career?" His voice was low but venomous. "Mr. Richardson is deciding on promotions next month, and you're standing there looking like—" Like what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Like the cleaning lady," he finished cruelly. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt Sarah tense beside me, but she didn't defend me. She just stood there, her face flushed with what I realized wasn't anger at Grant's cruelty, but embarrassment at my presence. "Grant, please," I started, but he wasn't finished. "I can't have you walking around here, talking to my colleagues, representing our family looking like that. It reflects poorly on Sarah, and by extension, on me." He looked around the room, ensuring no one was watching us. "There's a kitchen in the back where they're preparing the buffet. You're going to go there and stay there until this event is over." I stared at him in shock. "You want me to hide in the kitchen? I want you to be somewhere where you won't embarrass us further," he said bluntly. "Sarah and I have worked too hard building our reputation here for you to destroy it in one night." I turned to my daughter, hoping she would say something, anything to defend me. But Sarah just looked away, her silence speaking louder than any words could. "Mom?" she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe it would be better if you stayed out of sight for a while, just until the important networking is over." The betrayal was complete. My own daughter, the child I had raised alone after her father died when she was only 8 years old, was choosing her husband's career over her own mother's dignity. Grant didn't wait for my response. He took my arm again, more gently this time but with the same firmness, and guided me through the crowd toward the back of the venue. Several people glanced at us curiously, but no one said anything. They probably assumed I was a staff member being escorted to the service area. The kitchen was bustling with activity. Caterers in white uniforms were preparing elaborate dishes, their movements choreographed like a well-rehearsed dance. Grant spoke briefly to what appeared to be the head chef, who nodded and pointed toward a small storage room adjacent to the main kitchen. "You can wait here," Grant said, opening the door to reveal a cramped space filled with extra chairs and cleaning supplies. "Someone will let you know when it's time to leave." And then he was gone, leaving me standing alone in that storage room with nothing but my shame and the sound of muffled laughter and conversation from the party beyond the kitchen walls. I sank onto one of the folding chairs, my hands trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. In 65 years of life, I had faced many humiliations. I had been looked down upon for being a single mother, for working as a housekeeper, for not having a college education. But nothing had prepared me for this, being rejected and hidden away by my own family. As I sat there in that cramped storage room, surrounded by cleaning supplies and stacks of unused chairs, I found myself thinking about a little boy I used to care for many years ago. Marcus had been just 7 years old when I started working for his family, a shy child with big brown eyes who always seemed to be searching for someone to truly see him. His parents, the Thorntons, were wealthy executives who traveled frequently for business, leaving Marcus in the care of a series of nannies and housekeepers. When I arrived at their magnificent home in the affluent neighborhood of Riverside Heights, Marcus had already gone through 4 different caretakers in 2 years. I remember our first meeting so clearly. He was hiding behind the grand staircase in their foyer, watching me with curiosity and wariness. When I knelt down to his level and asked if he wanted to help me make cookies, something in his expression changed. It was as if he had been waiting his entire young life for someone to invite him to participate rather than simply observe. From that day forward, Marcus and I were inseparable during my working hours. While I cleaned and cooked, he would sit at the kitchen counter doing his homework, or simply talking to me about his day. He told me about the kids at school who made fun of his secondhand clothes. Despite his family's wealth, his parents believed in building character through modest allowances. He confided in me about feeling invisible in his own home, lost among his parents' busy schedules and social obligations. I became more than his housekeeper. I became the mother figure he desperately needed. I attended his school plays when his parents were traveling, cheered for him at Little League games from the stands filled with other parents who assumed I was just another mom. When he had nightmares, he would creep downstairs to find me, and I would hold him until he fell asleep again. The memory of Marcus's trust and love was a stark contrast to the betrayal I felt now, locked away like an embarrassment by my own daughter and son-in-law. Sitting in that storage room, I realized that sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into, or the one you create through marriage. It's the one built through genuine love and mutual respect. And right now, that family felt very far away indeed. The sounds from the party continued to filter through the kitchen walls, a constant reminder of the celebration I was deemed unworthy to attend. Each burst of laughter felt like another small wound, another confirmation that I didn't belong in my daughter's new world. But deep down, in a place I hadn't accessed in years, something began to stir. A memory of strength, of dignity, of a time when I had been valued and loved unconditionally. And with that memory came the faint outline of an idea. A phone number I hadn't called in far too long, belonging to someone who might just remember the woman I used to be, before I allowed myself to be diminished by people who should have cherished me most. Alone in that storage room, with only the sound of kitchen staff bustling about beyond the door, I found myself drowning in memories I had tried so hard to bury. The familiar ache in my chest reminded me of countless other times I had been made to feel small, invisible, unworthy. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the rejection came from Sarah, the daughter for whom I had sacrificed everything. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the beginning, when Sarah was just 8 years old, and we were suddenly alone in the world. Her father, my husband David, had died in a construction accident on a Tuesday morning in October. One moment I was packing his lunch and kissing him goodbye. The next, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room being told that the man who had been my anchor for 10 years was gone. The insurance payout was minimal, $12,000 that barely covered the funeral expenses and a few months of bills. I had been a stay-at-home mother up until that point, with no college degree and no real work experience. But I had an 8-year-old daughter who needed food, shelter, and stability, so I did what I had to do. I started cleaning houses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid $25 an hour in cash, and the families I worked for often had children Sarah's age, which meant I could sometimes bring her along during school breaks. Sarah hated it from the very beginning. She was embarrassed by the smell of cleaning chemicals on my clothes, mortified when her classmates' mothers turned out to be my employers. "Why can't you get a real job?" she asked me once when she was 12, her voice filled with the kind of casual cruelty that only children can deliver so effortlessly. Jennifer's mom works in an office and wears nice clothes. She doesn't have to scrub other people's toilets. I remember the way her words cut through me, but I also remember choosing not to show my hurt. Instead, I explained to her about the bills we had to pay, about the college fund I was trying to build for her future, about the sacrifices we sometimes have to make for the people we love. She rolled her eyes and went to her room, slamming the door behind her. That pattern continued for years. As Sarah grew older, her embarrassment about my work only intensified. She would lie to her friends about what I did for a living, claiming I worked in domestic services, as if the euphemism somehow elevated the reality. She refused to let me attend parent-teacher conferences in my work clothes, insisting I change into something normal, even if it meant I would be late. By the time she reached high school, our relationship had become strained to the breaking point. Sarah was accepted into the honor society, made cheerleading squad, and dated the quarterback of the football team. She was building the kind of social status that my profession threatened to undermine. I became her secret shame, the mother she acknowledged only when absolutely necessary. The irony was that during those same years when Sarah was learning to be ashamed of me, I was forming the most meaningful relationship of my adult life, my bond with Marcus Thornton. I had started working for the Thornton family when Marcus was 7 years old, the same year Sarah entered high school. The contrast between the two children couldn't have been more stark. While Sarah was pulling away from me, trying to distance herself from what she saw as my failure, Marcus was drawing closer, desperate for the kind of maternal attention his wealthy but emotionally absent parents couldn't provide. The Thornton mansion was a 45-minute drive from our small apartment, but the pay was excellent. $200 for 8 hours of work, 3 times a week. Mrs. Thornton, a sharp-featured woman who worked as a financial consultant, had made it clear from our first meeting that she expected professionalism and discretion above all else. "We travel frequently for business," she had explained during my interview, her manicured fingers drumming against her mahogany desk. "Marcus is a quiet child who won't give you any trouble. He's very independent for his age. We just need someone to maintain the house and ensure he's fed and safe when we're not here." What she didn't mention was that their idea of frequent travel meant being gone more often than they were home, or that 7-year-old Marcus was so starved for attention that he would sit at the top of the stairs for hours, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice he existed. I'll never forget the first time I found him there, perched on the top step like a little sentinel, his small face pressed between the balusters as he watched me dust the foyer below. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Hello there," I called up to him softly. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Well, hello, Marcus. I'm Patty. I'm going to be helping take care of the house while your parents are away." I climbed a few steps toward him, moving slowly so I wouldn't frighten him. "Are you hungry? I was just about to make some lunch." He nodded eagerly, and I could see the loneliness in his big brown eyes. When we got to the kitchen, I discovered that the refrigerator was stocked with expensive organic foods, but most of it required actual cooking, something that clearly wasn't happening regularly. There were a few frozen dinners and some fruit, but no evidence of anyone preparing real meals for this child. "What do you usually have for lunch?" I asked, opening various cabinets to get a sense of what was available. "Sometimes Mrs. Peterson makes sandwiches," he said, referring to the previous housekeeper, "but she didn't like to cook." I could read between the lines. Mrs. Peterson had likely done the minimum required to keep Marcus fed and safe, but hadn't provided the kind of nurturing care that a child his age desperately needed. "Well, I love to cook," I told him, rolling up my sleeves. "How would you like to help me make some homemade mac and cheese?" His face lit up like I had just offered him the most wonderful gift in the world. For the next hour, we worked side by side in that gleaming kitchen, Marcus carefully measuring milk and cheese while I prepared the pasta. He chattered away, telling me about his school, his teacher, Miss Williams, and his favorite book about dinosaurs. As we cooked together, I learned that Marcus spent most of his time alone, entertaining himself with books and educational toys, while his parents worked 14-hour days or traveled to various business conferences. He had a nanny who picked him up from school and stayed with him until 6 o'clock, but she was more of a supervisor than a companion. "Do you miss your mom and dad when they're gone?" I asked gently as we waited for the mac and cheese to bake. He shrugged, but I could see the sadness in his expression. "They're usually gone anyway. Even when they're home, they're in their offices or on phone calls." My heart broke for this little boy who had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. In many ways, he reminded me of Sarah at that age, except while Sarah was angry about what we didn't have, Marcus seemed resigned to having everything except love. That first day set the tone for our relationship. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I would arrive at the Thornton house at 8 in the morning, and Marcus would be waiting for me in the kitchen, already dressed and ready for whatever adventure we might have together. While I cleaned, he would follow me from room to room, helping with small tasks and filling the silence with his endless questions and observations. I learned that he was incredibly bright for his age, reading at a level far beyond his grade and showing a natural aptitude for mathematics that his parents barely acknowledged. His teachers had recommended him for gifted programs, but his parents were too busy to attend the meetings or fill out the necessary paperwork. Gradually, I began taking on more responsibilities in Marcus's life. Not because his parents asked me to, but because I could see how much he needed someone to care. I started arriving earlier to make him breakfast before school, ensuring he had a proper meal instead of the sugary cereal he usually grabbed on his way out the door. I packed healthy lunches with little notes tucked inside, the way I used to do for Sarah when she was younger. When Marcus's parents traveled, which was at least 2 weeks out of every month, I would stay overnight at the house to ensure he wasn't alone. During those times, our relationship deepened even further. We would cook dinner together, watch movies cuddled on the couch, and I would read to him before bedtime, all the nurturing activities that his biological parents were too busy to provide. The contrast with my relationship with Sarah during this period was heartbreaking. While I was giving Marcus the maternal love he craved, my own daughter was growing more distant by the day. She had started dating Grant during her junior year of high school, and he quickly became another source of embarrassment about my profession. I still remember the first time Grant came to our apartment to pick Sarah up for a date. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom unit in a working-class neighborhood, furnished with hand-me-downs and garage sale finds. When I opened the door to greet this well-dressed young man with his expensive car parked outside, I could see the judgment in his eyes immediately. "You must be Sarah's mother," he said politely, but his gaze was already moving past me, taking in the worn furniture and outdated decorations with barely concealed disdain. "Please call me Patty," I said, extending my hand with a smile. "Sarah's told me so much about you." He shook my hand briefly, his grip limp and disinterested. When Sarah appeared behind me, dressed in her prettiest outfit and practically glowing with excitement, Grant's entire demeanor changed. He became charming, attentive, focused entirely on her while treating me as if I were invisible. That dynamic never changed. For the 5 years they dated and the 5 years they've been married, Grant has treated me like an inconvenience at best, an embarrassment at worst, and gradually Sarah began to see me through his eyes. The final blow came tonight, in that kitchen, when my own daughter chose to side with her husband's cruelty rather than defend the mother who had sacrificed everything for her happiness and success. Sitting in that storage room, surrounded by cleaning supplies that reminded me so painfully of my years of hard work, I realized that Sarah had never understood the sacrifices I had made. She had never seen the late-night budgeting sessions where I stretched every dollar, the times I went without new clothes so she could have the latest fashions, the extra shifts I took to pay for her college education. Most importantly, she had never known about the times I had turned down opportunities for my own happiness to ensure hers remained intact. There had been a man, Robert, whom I met when Sarah was 16. He was a supervisor at one of the office buildings I cleaned, a kind widower with grown children who treated me with respect and genuine affection. He had asked me to dinner several times, and I found myself developing feelings for him that I hadn't experienced since David's death. But Sarah was at a crucial point in her high school career, applying to colleges and preparing for her future. I was afraid that bringing a man into our lives might disrupt her stability or create additional stress during such an important time. So I kept making excuses, turning down Robert's invitations, until he finally stopped asking. I often wondered what might have happened if I had chosen my own happiness just once. But at the time, Sarah's welfare had seemed more important than my own desires. I had convinced myself that there would be time for my own life later, after Sarah was established and secure. Now, at 65, I was beginning to understand that later might never come. Sarah was established and secure, but instead of gratitude or even basic respect, I had received rejection and humiliation. The irony was that during all those years when I was sacrificing my own happiness for Sarah's future, I had found a different kind of fulfillment with Marcus. He had valued my presence, cherished my attention, and made me feel like the kind of mother I had always wanted to be. As I sat in that storage room, wiping tears from my cheeks with a paper napkin I found in my purse, I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Marcus before his family moved away when he was 15. It had been 8 years of the most rewarding relationship of my adult life, watching him grow from a lonely 7-year-old into a confident, caring teenager. "I'll never forget you, Patty," he had said, his voice thick with emotion as his parents packed their belongings for their move to California. "You saved me. You made me feel like I mattered." I had cried that day, not just because I was losing Marcus, but because I was losing the one relationship where I felt truly valued and appreciated. He had promised to stay in touch, and for a while he did. But time and distance have a way of changing things, and gradually our communication faded to Christmas cards and birthday wishes. Now, sitting alone and humiliated, I found myself wondering what had become of that sweet boy who had once made me feel like the most important person in the world. Somewhere in my purse was a phone with his number still programmed in, a number I had saved but never had the courage to call. Tonight, for the first time in years, I was considering reaching out to someone who had once loved me unconditionally, because right now, I needed to remember what that felt like. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my purse. the dim light from the storage room's single bulb casting shadows across the cracked screen. I had carried Marcus's number with me for 8 years, updating it faithfully each time I got a new phone, but never finding the courage to use it. What would I say? How do you explain 8 years of silence? How do you reach out to someone you helped raise when your own daughter has just rejected you? The sounds from the party filtered through the kitchen walls. Laughter, clinking glasses, conversations about promotions and quarterly reports. Grant's world, where I clearly didn't belong. But sitting there among the cleaning supplies, I realized I was tired of accepting other people's judgments about my worth. I was tired of being invisible, tired of being ashamed, tired of pretending that my feelings didn't matter. Marcus had always seen me. Even as a 7-year-old child, he had looked at me and seen someone worthy of love and respect. Maybe, just maybe, that hadn't changed. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, Marcus Thornton. Below, it was a California number that I hoped was still current. My finger hovered over the call button for what felt like an eternity. What if he didn't remember me? What if he was busy with his own family now, his own life? What if 8 years had erased the bond we once shared? But then I thought about Grant's cruel words, about Sarah's betrayal, about the way they had both looked at me like I was something to be hidden away. I thought about all the nights I had held Marcus when he had nightmares, all the school events I had attended when his parents were too busy, all the times I had been the only person in his world who truly cared about his happiness. I pressed the call button before I could change my mind. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I was preparing myself for voicemail when a familiar voice answered. Deeper now, but unmistakably him. Hello? For a moment I couldn't speak. It was Marcus, but the voice of a man, not the boy I remembered. Marcus? I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was a pause, and I could hear background noise. What sounded like an office environment, phones ringing, muted conversations. I'm sorry, who is this? He asked politely. My heart sank. Of course he wouldn't recognize my voice after all these years. It's Patty. Patty Morrison. I used to work for your family when you were... Patty? The change in his voice was immediate and dramatic. The polite professionalism vanished, replaced by something that sounded like wonder mixed with joy. Patty? Oh my God. I can't believe it's really you. Tears sprang to my eyes at the warmth in his tone. Hello, sweetheart. I hope I'm not bothering you. I know it's been so long. Bothering me? Are you kidding? I could hear him moving, probably to somewhere more private. I've thought about you so many times over the years. I've wanted to call, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. Hold on, just 1 second. I heard a door close, and then his voice was clearer, more intimate. Mom, he said, and my heart nearly stopped. God, it's so good to hear your voice. Mom. He had called me that sometimes when he was young, usually when he was scared or hurt and needed comfort. But hearing it now, from this adult version of the boy I had loved, was almost overwhelming. I'm sorry for calling out of the blue, I said, wiping tears from my cheeks. I needed to hear a friendly voice tonight. You never need to apologize for calling me, he said firmly. Are you okay? You sound upset. Even after all these years, he could still read my emotions. That connection we had shared hadn't been broken by time or distance. I started to say I was fine, the automatic response I had trained myself to give whenever anyone asked. But this was Marcus. I had never lied to him when he was a child, and I wasn't going to start now. I'm not okay, actually. I'm having a really difficult night. What's wrong? Where are you? I'm at a party. Well, technically, I'm locked in a storage room at a party. I let out a bitter laugh. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Locked in a storage room? His voice sharpened with concern. Patty, what's going on? Are you safe? I'm safe, just humiliated. The whole story came pouring out then. Sarah's invitation to Grant's company party, my excitement at being included, the careful selection of my outfit, Grant's cruel assessment of my appearance, and finally, the devastating moment when my own daughter chose her husband's ambition over her mother's dignity. Marcus listened without interrupting, his breathing growing heavier as I described each humiliation. When I finished, there was a long silence. What's the name of the company? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Richardson and Associates. I said. Grant works in their marketing department. Why? Another silence. This one longer, and somehow more significant. Patty, Marcus said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Has this man, your son-in-law, has he treated you badly before tonight? The question caught me off guard. Well, yes, but how often? Marcus, I don't understand why. Please, he said, and I could hear something in his voice that reminded me of the determined little boy who used to insist on helping me with chores, even when I told him it wasn't necessary. Tell me about how he's treated you. So I did. I told him about 5 years of subtle insults, of being excluded from family events, of watching Grant gradually turn Sarah against me. I told him about the times Grant had forgotten to invite me to birthday celebrations and holiday dinners, about the way he would change the subject whenever I tried to contribute to conversations, about the constant message that I wasn't good enough for their social circle. And Sarah just lets this happen? Marcus asked, his voice tight with what sounded like anger. She loves him, I said, though even as I said it, I wondered if that was enough to excuse her complicity. And I understand that she's embarrassed by my background. I'm not educated. I'm not sophisticated. Stop. The word was sharp, cutting through my self-deprecation like a blade. Don't you dare talk about yourself that way. Don't you ever let me hear you minimize your worth again. The fierce protectiveness in his voice reminded me so strongly of the teenager he had been when he left, the boy who had once gotten into a fight at school defending a younger student from bullies, who had cried when he told me about it because he was afraid I would be disappointed in him for fighting. You are the most valuable person I have ever known, Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. You taught me what love looks like, what sacrifice means, what it feels like to have someone believe in you unconditionally. You saved my life, Patty. You literally saved my life. Marcus. No, let me finish. Do you remember when I was 13 and my parents were going through their divorce? I did remember. It had been a bitter, ugly separation that had lasted almost 2 years. Marcus had been caught in the middle, used as a pawn in their fights, his emotional well-being sacrificed to their legal maneuvering. You remember how I started having those panic attacks? He continued. How I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate in school? I remembered those dark months when Marcus had seemed to be disappearing before my eyes, becoming a shadow of the bright, curious boy I had known. His parents had been so consumed with their legal battles that they barely noticed their son was falling apart. You're the one who found me that night, Marcus said quietly. When I had taken all those pills from my mother's medicine cabinet? You're the one who called 911, who rode with me in the ambulance, who stayed with me in the hospital when my own parents were too busy with depositions to visit their suicidal son. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had tried so hard to forget that terrible night, walking into Marcus's room to check on him before I left for the day, and finding him unconscious on his bed, surrounded by empty pill bottles. The terror I had felt, the desperate race to save him, the hours I had spent praying in that hospital waiting room. You never left my side, Marcus continued. When the doctors said I needed counseling, you're the one who researched therapists and drove me to appointments. When my parents were too busy fighting each other to fight for me, you became my advocate. You saved me, and then you helped me heal. You were just a child going through a terrible time, I said, my voice breaking. Any decent person would have done the same thing. No, he said firmly. Not any person. Most people would have seen a troubled teenager and walked away. You saw a child who needed love, and you gave it unconditionally. You never made me feel like a burden or a problem to be solved. You just loved me. We were both crying now, the years of separation dissolving in the face of the bond we had always shared. Where are you now? I asked. Are you happy? Do you have a family? I'm in San Francisco, he said. I never married, never had children. I've been too focused on building something, on trying to become worthy of the sacrifice you made for me. What do you do? There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a strange note I couldn't identify. I run a company, Patty. a consulting firm that specializes in corporate restructuring and efficiency analysis. That sounds very impressive, I said, proud of the successful man he had become. It is impressive, he said, and I could hear what sounded like a smile in his voice. We work with some of the largest corporations in the country, helping them identify problems in their management structures, their employee relations, their corporate culture. You always were brilliant, I said. Even as a little boy, you could see patterns and solutions that adults missed. I learned that from you, he said. You taught me to pay attention to how people treat others, especially those they perceive as having less power. You taught me that how someone treats the people who work for them says everything about their character. Something in his tone was making me nervous, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Marcus, why are you asking me all these questions about Grant and the company? Another pause, longer this time. Patty, what's the address of this party? I want to make sure you get home safely. Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to worry about that. I can take a taxi, please, he said, and his voice carried the same stubborn determination I remembered from his childhood. Just tell me where you are. I gave him the address of the hotel where the party was being held, still not understanding why he seemed so concerned about my transportation. Stay right where you are, he said. Don't go back out to that party. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed. And don't you dare apologize to anyone for being exactly who you are. Marcus, I don't understand. You will, he said, and I could hear movement on his end of the line, the sound of a door opening. I'm on my way. You're coming here? But it's probably an hour drive from San Francisco, and it's already 9:30 at night. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, and there was something in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. Not a bad chill, but something that suggested the night was about to take a very different turn. 20 minutes? How is that possible? Because, Mom, he said, and the love in his voice was mixed with something else now. Something that sounded almost like anticipation. I'm already in the building. The line went dead, leaving me sitting in that storage room with my heart pounding and my mind racing. How could Marcus be in the building? What had he meant when he said he would be there in 20 minutes? And why did I have the strangest feeling that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly imagine? I looked around the cramped storage room that had been my prison for the past hour, and for the first time since Grant had locked me away, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt something else entirely. A growing sense that the little boy I had loved and protected was now a man who was about to return that protection in ways I never could have dreamed possible. I sat in that storage room for exactly 18 minutes, watching the clock on my phone and trying to make sense of Marcus's words. How could he possibly be in the building already? And what had he meant when he said he'd be there in 20 minutes if he was already here? The confusion was almost as overwhelming as the relief I felt at hearing his voice again. For the first time in hours, I didn't feel completely alone. Somewhere in this building was someone who truly cared about me, someone who remembered my worth even when I had forgotten it myself. At exactly 9:52, there was a soft knock on the storage room door. Patty? Marcus's voice came through the thin wood, and my heart leaped with recognition. I stood up quickly, smoothing my dress and running my hands through my hair. After 8 years, I was about to see the boy I had raised, now a grown man. I was nervous and excited and terrified all at once. I opened the door and gasped. The Marcus standing before me was nothing like the 15-year-old boy I remembered. He was tall, at least 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders filling out an expensive charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly budget. His brown hair was shorter now, styled professionally, and his face had lost the soft roundness of youth. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always seen straight into my soul, those were exactly the same. "Hello, Mom," he said softly, and before I could respond, he pulled me into a hug that lifted me completely off my feet. I buried my face in his shoulder and cried, not the bitter tears of humiliation I had been shedding all evening, but tears of pure joy. This was my boy, my Marcus, and he was here. "Look at you," I whispered when he finally set me down, my hands instinctively reaching up to smooth his hair the way I used to when he was small. "You're so handsome." So grown up. I can't believe it's really you. I can't believe it either, he said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. God, I've missed you. I've missed you too, sweetheart. Every single day. I studied his face, marveling at the man he had become. You look so successful, so confident. I'm so proud of you. Something flickered across his expression, pride mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. We need to talk, he said, glancing around the small storage room with obvious distaste. But not here. No one should ever have to have a conversation in a place like this. Marcus, I'm not supposed to leave this room, Grant said. Grant, Marcus repeated, and his voice carried a hardness that surprised me. Yes, we definitely need to talk about Grant. He offered me his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Will you trust me? I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at me so trustingly all those years ago, and nodded. Of course I trusted him. We walked out of the storage room together, through the busy kitchen where staff members glanced at us curiously. Marcus moved with a confidence that commanded attention, and I noticed that people naturally stepped aside to let us pass. Where are we going? I asked as he guided me toward what appeared to be a service corridor. Somewhere private where we can talk properly, he said. There's a small conference room on this floor that should be empty. How do you know about conference rooms in this hotel? He glanced at me with a small smile. I know a lot of things, Patty. More than you might expect. The conference room he led me to was elegant but intimate. A mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Marcus closed the door behind us and gestured for me to take a seat. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, sweetheart. I just want to look at you. I shook my head in amazement. I still can't believe you're here. When you said you were in the building, I thought maybe you were attending the party as someone's guest. But I'm not a guest, Marcus said quietly, taking the seat across from me. Patty, there's something I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me before anyone else has a chance to explain. Something in his tone made my stomach flutter with nervousness. What is it? He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table between us. Do you remember what I told you on the phone? About the company I run? Yes. You said you do corporate consulting, restructuring and efficiency analysis. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. He took a deep breath. My company is Thornton Strategic Solutions. We're one of the largest management consulting firms on the West Coast. We specialize in identifying problems in corporate culture, particularly issues related to employee treatment, workplace harassment, and management accountability. I nodded, still not understanding why he seemed so nervous about sharing this information. Patty, Richardson and Associates hired my company 6 months ago. The words hit me like a physical blow. They what? They've been having problems with employee retention, multiple complaints to HR about hostile work environment issues, and rumors of discriminatory practices. They hired us to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of their corporate culture and make recommendations for improvement. My mind was reeling. You mean, you've been working with Grant's company? I've been investigating Grant's company, Marcus corrected, and tonight, I'm here in my professional capacity to observe their leadership team in an informal social setting. It's a standard part of our evaluation process, seeing how executives behave when they think no one important is watching. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. You've been here all evening? I arrived an hour ago. I've been mingling with the staff, observing interactions, taking notes. His jaw tightened, including watching your son-in-law's behavior toward various employees and family members. Oh no, I whispered, mortification washing over me. You saw what happened? I saw enough, he said grimly. I saw a man who thinks his position gives him the right to humiliate and isolate anyone he perceives as beneath his status. I saw someone who lacks the basic human decency that any company should expect from its employees, let alone its management team. I buried my face in my hands. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you would be here. No idea you would witness. Patty, look at me. His voice was gentle but firm. When I raised my head, his eyes were blazing with an intensity I had never seen before. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Do you understand me? But the way he treated me, the way I let him. The way you let him what? exist in your family, love your daughter, try to be a part of their lives despite being shown over and over again that you're not welcome. Marcus shook his head. You've done nothing wrong. He's the one who should be ashamed, not you. I felt tears threatening again. I just wanted to be a good mother-in-law. I wanted Sarah to be happy. And what about your happiness? Marcus asked. When was the last time anyone in your family asked about that? The question hung in the air between us, unanswered because we both knew the truth. I need to tell you something else, Marcus continued. Something I saw tonight that goes beyond just poor treatment of you. What do you mean? I've been watching Grant interact with his colleagues all evening. I've seen him berate a young intern for spilling wine on his shoe, watched him make inappropriate comments to several female staff members, and observed him taking credit for a project that was clearly completed by his subordinates. Marcus's professional demeanor was back now, his voice crisp and analytical. This man isn't just a bad son-in-law, Patty. He's a liability to any company that employs him. My heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying that my report to Richardson and Associates is going to include a very detailed assessment of Grant's character and conduct. And based on what I've observed tonight, including his treatment of you, my recommendation is going to be that he's not suitable for a leadership position in any company that values ethical behavior and employee welfare. I stared at him in shock. You're going to recommend that he be fired? I'm going to recommend that he be evaluated very carefully by HR, with particular attention paid to his interactions with subordinates and his demonstration of company values. Marcus's smile was cold and professional. What they decide to do with that information is up to them. But Marcus, if Grant loses his job, it will affect Sarah too. Their mortgage, their lifestyle, will be their problem to solve. Marcus finished firmly. Patty, you can't continue to prioritize the welfare of people who treat you with contempt. You can't keep sacrificing your own dignity to protect people who wouldn't lift a finger to protect yours. He was right, and I knew it. But the maternal instinct to shield Sarah from consequences, even when those consequences were deserved, was hard to overcome. There's something else, Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. Something I need to ask you. What? How long has it been since someone stood up for you? How long since someone told the people hurting you that their behavior was unacceptable? The question hit me harder than I expected. I thought back over the years, the small humiliations, the casual dismissals, the gradual erosion of my place in my own daughter's life. Through it all, I had been alone, making excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable, accepting treatment that no one should have to endure. I can't remember, I whispered. Marcus reached across the table and took my hands in his. They were strong hands now, capable hands, but his touch was as gentle as it had been when he was 7 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. That ends tonight, he said firmly. I'm here now, and I'm not going to let anyone treat you badly ever again. Not Grant, not Sarah, not anyone. Marcus, you can't. I can, he interrupted. I'm not a powerless child anymore, Patty. I have resources, influence, and most importantly, I have the power to make sure that anyone who hurts you faces consequences for their actions. I looked at this man who had once been my lonely little boy, and I saw something that took my breath away. Marcus had grown up to be exactly the kind of person I had always hoped he would become. Strong, successful, and principled. But more than that, he had retained the capacity for fierce loyalty that had always been his most beautiful quality. What happens now? I asked. Marcus glanced at his watch. Now, we go back to that party. I have some people I need to meet, some observations I need to complete. His smile was sharp and determined. And Grant is going to get a very memorable introduction to the concept of consequences. I don't think I can face them again, I admitted. Seeing the way they looked at me, the way Sarah just stood there while he humiliated me. You won't be alone, Marcus said, standing and offering me his arm again. I'll be right beside you, and I promise you this. By the end of tonight, everyone in that room will know exactly how valuable you are. As we walked toward the door, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that someone had my back. Marcus had grown up to be my protector, just as I had once been his. And I had the strangest feeling that Grant was about to learn what it felt like to face someone who couldn't be intimidated, dismissed, or hidden away in a storage room. Walking back into that party on Marcus's arm was like entering a completely different world. The same chandeliers sparkled overhead, the same elegant crowd mingled with glasses of champagne, but everything had changed because I was no longer alone. Marcus moved through the room with quiet confidence, nodding to people he had apparently met earlier in the evening, his hand protectively on my elbow. I could see Grant across the room, holding court near the bar with several colleagues, his face animated as he told what appeared to be a humorous story. Sarah stood beside him, laughing at his jokes, completely unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. "Remember," Marcus murmured in my ear, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin. The navy blue dress that Grant had deemed so inappropriate suddenly felt like armor. It was clean, modest, and purchased with money I had earned through honest work. There was nothing shameful about that. "Mr. Thornton," a voice called from across the room. I turned to see Mr. Richardson approaching us with his wife, the same couple who had looked at me with such polite disdain earlier in the evening. "Mr. Richardson," Marcus replied smoothly, extending his hand. "Thank you again for allowing me to observe this evening. It's been very enlightening. I hope you've been able to gather the information you need for your assessment," Mr. Richardson said. Then his eyes fell on me with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry, but haven't we met before? This is Patty Morrison," Marcus said before I could respond. "She's very special to me." I felt a flush of pride at the warmth in his voice, but I noticed that he hadn't specifically explained our relationship. Mrs. Richardson was studying me with new interest, clearly trying to reconcile the woman she had dismissed earlier with someone important enough to warrant Marcus's personal attention. "Mrs. Morrison," she said carefully, extending her hand again. "How lovely to see you again." "The pleasure is mine," I replied, accepting her handshake with newfound confidence. "Patty raised me," Marcus said simply, and I saw both Richardson's eyebrows rise in surprise. "When my biological parents were too busy with their own lives to notice their son was drowning, she stepped in and saved me. She taught me everything I know about loyalty, integrity, and what it means to truly care for another person." The weight of his words settled over the conversation like a warm blanket. Mrs. Richardson's expression shifted completely, her polite social mask replaced by genuine interest. "How wonderful," she said, and this time her smile was real. "You must be incredibly proud of what Marcus has accomplished." "I am," I said, looking at the man who had once been my scared, lonely little boy. "But I'm not surprised. He was always exceptional." "Mr. Richardson," Marcus said, "I was hoping to speak with you privately before I leave this evening. I have some preliminary observations that I think you'll find quite interesting." "Of course," Mr. Richardson nodded. "Shall we use the small conference room upstairs?" "Actually," Marcus glanced around the room, "I think it might be more valuable for you to observe some of the dynamics I've been noting firsthand. Would you mind if we conducted this conversation here, in the context of the social environment?" Mr. Richardson looked intrigued. "Certainly. What specifically did you want to discuss?" Marcus's eyes found Grant across the room. "I'd like to talk about leadership qualities and how they manifest in informal settings. For instance, how does a person in a management position treat those they perceive as having less status or power?" "That's an excellent metric for evaluation," Mr. Richardson agreed. "Character often reveals itself most clearly in unguarded moments." "Precisely." Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "For example, I observed one of your marketing department managers this evening demonstrating some concerning behaviors." My heart started beating faster as I realized what Marcus was doing. He wasn't just going to file a quiet report later. He was going to address Grant's behavior directly, in front of his boss, with me standing right there as a witness. "Which manager?" Mr. Richardson asked, his tone becoming more serious. "Grant Morrison," Marcus said, and I felt a jolt at hearing my married name used in this context. He's married to Mrs. Morrison's daughter. Mr. Richardson's eyes widened as he made the connection, and I saw him glance at his wife with a look that suggested they were both remembering their earlier encounter with me. "What specific behaviors did you observe?" Mr. Richardson asked carefully. Marcus pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Apparently, he had been taking actual notes throughout the evening. At approximately 8:45, I witnessed Mr. Morrison verbally berating a young woman who appeared to be an intern for accidentally bumping into him and spilling a small amount of wine on his shoe. His language was inappropriate for any workplace interaction, and his tone suggested a pattern of bullying behavior toward subordinates. Mr. Richardson's expression darkened. "I see. What else?" At 9:15, I observed him taking credit for what appeared to be another employee's work while speaking to a potential client. When the actual project manager tried to clarify their role in the presentation, Mr. Morrison cut them off and redirected the conversation. Marcus flipped a page in his notebook, his voice remaining professionally neutral while delivering what amounted to a devastating character assassination. "But perhaps most concerning," Marcus continued, "was his treatment of a family member. At approximately 9:30, I witnessed Mr. Morrison physically escort an elderly woman to a storage room in the kitchen area and lock her inside because he was embarrassed by her appearance. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Richardson stared at Marcus, then at me, his face cycling through shock, confusion, and dawning outrage. "He locked a family member in a storage room?" Mrs. Richardson whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "The elderly woman was his mother-in-law," Marcus said, his eyes meeting mine with a look of fierce protectiveness. "This woman, who raised his wife as a single mother, who worked multiple jobs to ensure her daughter could attend college, who has never asked for anything except basic respect and inclusion in family events." I felt tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of gratitude for having someone who saw my worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. "Where is Mr. Morrison now?" Mr. Richardson asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Marcus nodded toward the bar area where Grant was still entertaining his colleagues, completely oblivious to the conversation taking place 20 feet away. "Would you like to observe his behavior when confronted with accountability?" Marcus asked. Mr. Richardson straightened his tie, his jaw set with determination. "Yes, I would." What happened next unfolded like a scene from a movie, except it was real, and I was living it. Marcus, still with me on his arm, approached Grant's group with Mr. and Mrs. Richardson flanking us. Grant was in the middle of what appeared to be a boastful story about some client interaction when he noticed our approach. "Mr. Richardson!" Grant exclaimed, his face lighting up with the same desperate eagerness to impress that I had witnessed earlier. "What a pleasure. I was just telling everyone about the Henderson account and how we—" "Mr. Morrison," Mr. Richardson interrupted, his tone formal and cold. "I understand you've been entertaining your colleagues this evening." "Well, yes, sir," Grant replied, clearly confused by his boss's tone, but still smiling. "It's been a wonderful party. Really brings everyone together." "Indeed," Mr. Richardson said. "It certainly reveals character. I'd like you to meet someone." Grant's eyes flicked to Marcus with polite interest, then to me with barely concealed annoyance. "This is Marcus Thornton," Mr. Richardson continued. "He's the CEO of Thornton Strategic Solutions, the consulting firm we hired to evaluate our corporate culture." The color drained from Grant's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His eyes darted between Marcus and Mr. Richardson, and I could practically see his mind racing as he tried to calculate how much trouble he was in. "Mr. Thornton," Grant stammered, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you. I had no idea you were here this evening." Marcus looked at Grant's outstretched hand for a long moment before deliberately ignoring it. "I'm sure you didn't," Marcus said, his voice glacially polite. "I've been observing employee interactions all evening, very illuminating." Sarah had appeared at Grant's side, her face pale as she began to understand that something was terribly wrong. "And this," Mr. Richardson continued, gesturing to me, "is Mrs. Morrison. I believe you know her." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Around us, his colleagues were watching with growing fascination, sensing drama, but not yet understanding its scope. "Hello, Grant," I said quietly, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with confusion and dawning horror. "I understand you had some concerns about Mrs. Morrison's appropriateness for this evening's event," Marcus said, his tone conversational but his eyes deadly serious. That is, there was a misunderstanding," Grant stammered. "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you call locking your mother-in-law in a storage room because you were ashamed of her clothes?" The group around us had gone completely silent. I could see other conversations stopping as people strained to hear what was being said. I didn't mean. Grant's face was now bright red, sweat beading on his forehead. "What exactly did you mean?" Marcus asked. "When you told this woman, who raised your wife as a single mother, who worked as a housekeeper to pay for your wife's education, who has shown your family nothing but love and support, when you told her she looked like the cleaning lady and was an embarrassment to your reputation, what exactly did you mean?" Each word landed like a physical blow. Grant looked around desperately, seeking support from his colleagues, but found only shocked faces and obvious judgment. "Marcus," Sarah said weakly, "there's been some kind of mistake." "The only mistake," Marcus said, turning his attention to my daughter, "was made by people who forgot that treating others with basic human decency isn't optional, regardless of their social status or financial circumstances. Mr. Richardson stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Mr. Morrison, in light of what I've learned about your conduct this evening, both toward employees and family members, I think it would be best if you cleared out your office first thing Monday morning." Grant's face went white. "Sir, please, if you'll just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Mr. Richardson said firmly. "A man who would treat his own mother-in-law with such cruelty, who would humiliate her in public and lock her away like she was something shameful, is not someone I want representing this company." The circle of colleagues around us had grown larger, and I could see phones being discreetly raised as people began recording what was clearly going to be office legend for years to come. Grant turned to Sarah desperately, but my daughter was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Richardson said, turning to me with obvious respect, "I owe you an apology. When my wife and I met you earlier this evening, we didn't realize who you were or the significance of your presence here." "You couldn't have known," I said graciously, though inside I was marveling at this complete reversal of fortune. "Actually, we could have," Mrs. Richardson interjected, her voice filled with regret. "We could have taken the time to actually speak with you, to show basic courtesy to another human being regardless of their perceived social status. I'm ashamed of our behavior." Marcus put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close in a gesture that was both protective and proud. "Mrs. Morrison raised me when my own parents were too self-absorbed to notice their son was falling apart," he said, addressing the crowd that had gathered around us. "She taught me that character isn't measured by wealth or status, but by how you treat people who can't necessarily help you in return. She saved my life, and she shaped the man I became." He looked directly at Grant, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in earshot pay attention. "Anyone who would treat such a woman with disrespect has revealed everything I need to know about their character, and it's not character that belongs in any workplace I'm consulting for." Grant opened his mouth one more time, but no sound came out. He looked around the room at faces that ranged from disgusted to pitying, and I saw the exact moment when he realized that his social and professional life had just imploded spectacularly. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt like someone had finally stood up for me. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Marcus's San Francisco home, watching him tie his tie in preparation for another day at the office. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the comfortable space that had become my haven, a place where I was valued, cherished, and treated like the family I had always been to him. "You don't have to make breakfast every morning," Marcus said, adjusting his collar in the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. "Mrs. Chen is perfectly capable of handling the cooking." "Mrs. Chen is lovely," I replied, flipping pancakes on the griddle. "But she doesn't make them the way you like them. Besides, this gives us time to talk before your day gets crazy." He smiled, the same warm expression that had melted my heart when he was 7 years old, and asked if he could help me bake cookies. "I have some news," he said, settling into his chair at the kitchen island. "The Richardson case is officially closed. Their company culture audit is complete, and they've implemented all of our recommendations." "And Grant?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. "Still unemployed, as far as I know. Turns out word travels fast in corporate circles. When potential employers call for references and hear about what happened at that party." Marcus shrugged. "Let's just say his reputation has preceded him." I set a plate of pancakes in front of him, along with the real maple syrup he had loved since childhood. I felt a complex mix of emotions about Grant's situation. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that consequences had finally caught up with someone who had spent years avoiding them. "Sarah called yesterday," I said quietly, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus looked up from cutting his pancakes, his expression carefully neutral. "How is she?" "Struggling. The divorce was finalized last week, and she's had to move into a much smaller apartment. She's working 2 jobs now, her regular position at the marketing firm and weekend shifts at a retail store." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "She sounds different. Humbled, I suppose. Are you planning to see her?" It was the question I had been wrestling with for weeks. Sarah had been calling regularly since the night at the party, her messages growing increasingly desperate as her marriage and financial security crumbled around her. At first, her calls had been angry. She had blamed me for ruining her life, for destroying her marriage, for being selfish and vindictive. But as the weeks passed and the reality of her situation sank in, her tone had changed. The anger had given way to what sounded like genuine remorse. And in our last conversation, she had done something she hadn't done since she was a child. She had admitted she was wrong. "I think so," I said finally. "But not to rescue her. Not to fix her problems or make everything go back to the way it was." Marcus nodded approvingly. "What changed your mind?" "Something you said to me that first night, about how I couldn't keep sacrificing my own dignity to protect people who wouldn't do the same for me." I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. "But I also realized that doesn't mean I have to harden my heart completely. Sarah is my daughter. She made terrible choices, and she hurt me deeply. But she's also a woman who was manipulated by someone who preyed on her insecurities. That doesn't excuse her behavior toward you. No, it doesn't. But it helps me understand it." I looked at Marcus, this remarkable man who had grown up to be everything I had hoped he would become. "You taught me something important too, you know." "What's that?" "That family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about choice. It's about deciding to love and support someone because you value them, not because you have to." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You chose me as your family when you were 7 years old, and you chose me again when you were 32. That means more to me than anything else ever could." His eyes grew bright with emotion. "You saved me first. We saved each other." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Marcus glanced at his watch with a frown. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said, standing to answer the door. I followed him, curiosity getting the better of me. When he opened the front door, Sarah stood on the step, looking smaller and more uncertain than I had ever seen her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain blouse, and she was clutching a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, though I was surprised she remembered. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't have the right to just show up here, but I was hoping we could talk." Marcus stepped aside without a word, his expression carefully neutral but not unwelcoming. Sarah's eyes went to him, and I saw her swallow hard before speaking. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. What I allowed Grant to do to my mother was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed that it took losing everything for me to see how wrong I was." He studied her for a long moment. The apology you owe isn't to me. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to slide down her cheeks as she turned back to me. Mom, I don't even know where to start. What Grant did to you that night, what I let him do for years, there's no excuse for it. No, there isn't, I agreed, but my voice was gentle. I was so caught up in trying to fit into his world, trying to be the kind of wife he wanted, that I lost sight of who I really was. I let him convince me that you were somehow embarrassing, that your background reflected poorly on me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But you weren't the embarrassment, Mom. I was. I was embarrassed by the sacrifices you made for me instead of being grateful for them. I felt my own eyes filling with tears as I listened to words I had waited years to hear. I threw away the most important relationship in my life for a man who turned out to be cruel and selfish, Sarah continued. And I don't know if I can ever make up for that, but I want to try. If you'll let me. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the polished, status-conscious woman she had become, but the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me about her dreams and fears. That little girl was still in there somewhere, buried under years of poor choices and misplaced priorities. It's going to take time, I said finally. I can't just pretend the last 5 years didn't happen, that the way you treated me didn't hurt. I know, Sarah said quickly. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can be better, that I can be the daughter you deserved all along. Marcus cleared his throat softly. I should let you two talk privately. I'll be in my office if you need anything. As he walked away, I felt a surge of gratitude for his instinctive understanding of what this moment required. He had given me the strength to stand up for myself, but he also trusted me to navigate this reconciliation in my own way. Come in, I said to Sarah, stepping aside to let her enter. We sat in Marcus's comfortable living room, the bouquet of daisies on the coffee table between us like a peace offering. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke, both of us struggling to bridge a gap that had seemed insurmountable just months before. The house is beautiful, Sarah said finally, looking around at the tasteful furnishings and family photos that Marcus had insisted on displaying, pictures of us from when he was young, images of the family we had created through choice rather than biology. Marcus has been very generous, I said. He invited me to live here after that night at the party. He said he had spent too many years without his family close by. He calls you family? He calls me Mom, I said simply. He has since he was young. Sarah's face crumpled. I threw that away, didn't I? The right to be called your family? You threw away the privilege of taking it for granted, I corrected, but the opportunity to earn it back. That's still there, if you're willing to do the work. What kind of work? I leaned forward, choosing my words carefully. The work of rebuilding trust. The work of proving that you value me for who I am, not who you think I should be. The work of understanding that love isn't about control or changing people to fit your image of what's acceptable. Sarah nodded eagerly. I'll do anything. I've lost everything else that mattered to me, but I don't want to lose you, too. You haven't lost everything that matters, I said gently. You've lost the things that you thought mattered but actually didn't. Your job is still there, isn't it? Yes, but it's been difficult since Grant was fired. Some people look at me differently now, because they're wondering if you share his values? Sarah flinched but nodded. I suppose so. Then show them you don't. Show them that you learned something from what happened. Show them that you're committed to treating people with respect, regardless of their background or status. We talked for 2 more hours, the conversation flowing easier as the initial awkwardness faded. Sarah told me about the reality of her new financial situation, about having to learn to budget and prioritize in ways she had never needed to before. She talked about the loneliness of her smaller apartment, about missing the security of her old life, but not missing the person she had been in it. I've been thinking about getting a second degree, she said as our conversation wound down. Maybe social work or counseling? I want to do something that actually helps people instead of just selling them things they don't need. That sounds meaningful, I said, and I meant it. Would you? Would you maybe like to have dinner sometime next week? Sarah asked hesitantly. Nothing fancy, just maybe pizza or something simple. I'd like to hear about your life here, about what makes you happy. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had hurt me so deeply but who seemed genuinely committed to change, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. I'd like that, I said. When Sarah left, clutching my phone number written on a piece of paper like it was precious, I found Marcus in his office reviewing documents for his next consulting project. "How did it go?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. "It was a beginning," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Not a resolution, but a beginning." "Are you okay with that?" "I think so. For the first time in years, I feel like I have choices. I can choose to forgive her gradually, on my own terms. I can choose what kind of relationship I want to have with her going forward. I can choose to protect my own peace while still being open to reconciliation." Marcus smiled. "Those sound like healthy choices." "I learned from the best," I said, looking around his office at the diplomas and awards that testified to his success. "You know, I spent so many years feeling like I had failed as a mother because Sarah was ashamed of me. But looking at you, at the man you became, at the way you've built your life around principles instead of just profit, I think maybe I did something right after all." "You did everything right," Marcus said firmly. "You taught me that love isn't conditional on success or status. You taught me that character matters more than credentials. You taught me that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but how they treat others. And you taught me that family is something you build, not just something you're born into." "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. I thought about Sarah's tentative smile, about the difficult work of rebuilding trust, about the possibility of genuine reconciliation with my only child. I thought about Marcus's unwavering love, about the security and respect I had found in his home, about the family we had created through choice and commitment. "Now," I said, feeling lighter than I had in years, "I get to live as the woman I always was inside, valued, cherished, and surrounded by people who see my worth. I get to be a mother to you, the way I always have been. And maybe, if Sarah proves she's serious about change, I get to be a mother to her again too, but on terms that honor both of us. And if she doesn't follow through? Then I'll be sad, but I won't be devastated. Because I've learned something important. My worth isn't dependent on other people's recognition of it. I'm enough, just as I am." Marcus stood up and came around his desk to hug me, the same way he had when he was small and needed comfort. "Yes, you are," he said. "You always were." Standing in that embrace, surrounded by the quiet luxury of a home where I was treasured, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories don't come from changing other people's minds about your value. Sometimes they come from remembering your worth yourself and refusing to accept anything less than the love and respect you deserve. The little boy I had saved had grown up to save me in return. My daughter might learn to value me again, or she might not, but either way, I would be fine, because I was finally, truly home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.